Thumbs up. Testing. Low. Yeah. Check, check, check. All right, sweet. Hashtag selfie, hashtag duckface, hashtag I'm awesome.
Hey, Mrs. Crago, what's up?
Hey, Ms. Metzler, nothing much, hashtag chillin', what's up with you?
You know, I just got done with the musical.
Yeah.
Hashtag 7B. Hashtag we made it through the winter. Hashtag I haven't seen the sun in like 2 weeks. Hashtag which wouldn't be a problem if I were a vampire. Hashtag Team Edward. Hashtag does anyone care about Twilight anymore? Hashtag did anyone ever care about Twilight? Hashtag Hunger Games. Hashtag
I know, the kids did such an awesome job with the musical. Hashtag giddy up, Gideon. Hashtag who knew Ross Hedlund could dance?
I know. Hashtag sugar.
I mean, hashtag with all those snow days that we had, oh my gosh, hashtag snowmageddon, hashtag polar vortex, hashtag flurricane, hashtag Jim Cantori was here, hashtag the groundhog knows, hashtag believe the hype, hashtag don't stop believing.
Seriously, we could go without some precipitation for a while. Hashtag already used up all my snow day activities. Hashtag already made a fool of myself on YouTube. Hashtag bored. Hashtag Lord. Hashtag Royals. Hashtag Queen. Hashtag singing Bohemian Rhapsody in my car by myself at the top of my lungs. Hashtag forever alone.
Hashtag totes. I mean, think about our classes. I hashtag forget what my students look like. Hashtag school in July. Hashtag do you want to build a snowman? Hashtag no.
Hashtag the struggle.
Hashtag the struggle is real.
Plus, all the problems that the snow is causing with renovations, right? Like, hashtag it's raining inside the school. Hashtag CCHS problems. Hashtag I like me some lime green walls. Hashtag it ain't easy being green. Hashtag Kermit loves piggy. Hashtag now I'm craving pigs in a blanket.
Oh, hey! I have some. Yes. Hashtag made them myself. Hashtag I burned them a little. Hashtag just kidding, I got them at Chick-fil-A. Hashtag eat more chicken. Hashtag cows. Hashtag now I want a burger.
Hashtag too bad all my students work at Glory Days.
Hashtag first world problems.
But thanks. Hey, maybe I'll use my newfound free time to catch up on one of those new shows, like Hashtag Voice.
No, you have to watch hashtag American Idol. Hashtag America. Hashtag need me some patriotism after losing to Canada. Hashtag Sochi. Hashtag ice dancing. Hashtag dream job. Hashtag I could be fabulous.
American Idol. Hashtag so 10 years ago.
Hashtag if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Hashtag loyalty. Hashtag J-Lo could take Christina Aguilera.
Hashtag Shakira could take J-Lo. Hashtag hips don't lie. Hashtag I'm on tonight, my hips don't lie. Hashtag Adam. Hashtag Levine. Hashtag Man Crush Monday. Hashtag call me maybe.
Hashtag it's Friday.
Hashtag the world has forgotten about Rebecca Black.
Hashtag ratchet.
Hey. Hashtag pause before you post.
Sorry. Well, either way, hashtag talent shows rock. Hashtag I wish I was in one.
So you watch any other shows? Like hashtag Walking Dead, hashtag The Following?
Hashtag nightmares.
Hashtag sleeping with the lights on.
Hashtag monsters under my bed.
Hashtag monster.
Hashtag Eminem.
Hashtag the real Slim Shadys back in 1999.
Hashtag truth.
Hey, I saw you at the basketball game on Wednesday night. Hashtag heartbreaker.
I know, but our guys had a really great season. Hashtag BDP. Hashtag Blue Devils. Hashtag that's all we do. Hashtag we go hard. Hashtag we can't stop. Hashtag Miley Cyrus.
Hashtag you will stop.
Hashtag don't hate. Hashtag haters gonna hate.
Hashtag bring back old school hip hop.
Hashtag foreshadowing.
But back to the basketball game. What was up with the other team? Hashtag I'm pretty sure my dad graduated with number 55. Hashtag birth certificate check. Hashtag I want justice. Hashtag I'll tell you what it won't. want what I really, really want.
Hashtag, so tell me what you want, what you really, really want.
I wanna. Hashtag, I wanna really, really, really want.
Say,
You know what though? It is really great being here rallying behind Mr. Billy Hayes.
Oh,
Hashtag bow ties. Hashtag swag.
Hashtag Mr. CCHS. Hashtag you raise me up.
Hashtag integrity. Hashtag nailed it.
Hashtag got him, coach. Hashtag man dime. Hashtag shotgun.
Hashtag fudge. Hashtag snapdragon. Hashtag what are the means of that?
Hashtag Beaver Fever.
Hashtag pro shop. Hashtag wrong number.
Hashtag 5, 6, 7, 8. Hashtag beards for Bailey.